She beat a Wimbledon champion, went home to a mall, and what happened next nobody saw coming. A 21-year-old girl walks into a shopping mall in Makati City, and thousands of people rearrange their entire week just to stand near her. No tickets, no stage lights, no red carpet, just a registration table, a stopwatch, and a country that has decided, without ever voting on it, that this is the most important thing happening in the Philippines that day. Here's what should stop you cold. 12 days after that mall appearance, she flew to Washington, D.C., and did something so absurd, so historically loaded, that even the players she beat could barely explain it afterward. And by the time you finish this video, you're going to understand exactly why a tennis player from Quezon City has quietly become one of the most talked about athletes on the planet, and why the story is nowhere near finished. Stick around, because the ending of this one is still being written in real time, and you are going to want to see where it goes. If you're new here, subscribe now, because we're about to break down the full, verified timeline behind the biggest sports story to come out of the Philippines in a generation. And there is a lot more coming from this rise before the year is out. Let's rewind, because to understand why a mall event in Makati briefly became the center of Filipino sports culture, you need to understand what happened 6 days before it. On July 6, 2026, on center court at Wimbledon, in front of Roger Federer seated in the royal box, Alexandra Eala, 21 years old, ranked outside the top 100 barely a year earlier, lost a tennis match. That's the part that gets buried under everything else. So let's say it plainly first. She lost. Jasmine Paolini of Italy beat her in the fourth round 6-4, 4-6, 6-3, in a match that swung so hard in the second set that Eala looked, for about 40 minutes, like she might actually finish the job. She didn't. And it didn't matter, because 2 days earlier she had already rewritten what a Filipino tennis player was allowed to be. On July 4th, on that same center court, Eala faced Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, a multiple Grand Slam winner, one of the most feared players of her generation. Eala won it, 7-6 in a tiebreak that stretched to 11-9, then 6-2. Not a fluke, not a stolen set on a bad day for the champion. A full, complete dismantling in 2 sets. When it was over, she gave an on-court interview that reportedly moved people well beyond the Philippines, and by the time she walked off, she had already become the first Filipina in the Open era to reach a Grand Slam fourth round, the first Filipina ever seeded at a major tournament, and the first Filipina match winner in Wimbledon history. Here's the detail that should give you chills. It wasn't a fluke run built on a soft draw. This was a 21-year-old beating the actual defending champion, on the actual sport's most famous court, with the actual king of Switzerland's tennis royalty watching from the box a few meters away. So when the loss to Paolini came 2 days later, the story had already been decided. The scoreline said fourth round. The moment said something bigger. Now here's where it gets strange, and this is the part almost nobody outside the Philippines actually understood at the time. 2 days after that Wimbledon exit, Eala landed home at Ninoy Aquino International Airport. She was met not by a small group of family and friends, but by a crowd so large it turned an ordinary arrivals hall into something closer to a stadium, greeted in person by Philippine Olympic Committee President Abraham "Bambol" Tolentino. That was Sunday. She had been eliminated from the tournament less than 72 hours earlier, and her country was already treating her return like a coronation. Then came Wednesday, July 15th. Globe Telecom, the telecommunications company that had signed Eala as a brand ambassador years before most of the country knew her name, announced home court, the Alex Eala fan meet experience at the Glorietta Activity Center in Makati City. Free. Open to the public. Registration at 4 p.m. Program running from 6:30 to 8. No tickets sold. Nothing to buy. And still, the moment the announcement went out, a sentence started traveling across Filipino social media that wasn't technically true and was somehow completely accurate at the same time. That the event had sold out in minutes. Nothing was sold. There was no ticket queue, no countdown clock, no scalpers. But everyone who repeated that sentence knew exactly what they meant by it. That demand had instantly outstripped what a shopping mall activity center could physically hold. When Wednesday actually arrived, it played out almost exactly like that. Fans lined up from 3 levels of the mall. A 12-year-old aspiring tennis player named Dane Lakati said she felt so overwhelmed meeting her idol that she was momentarily at a loss for words. An 80-year-old man named Dusty Malilan, who had traveled in from Antipolo City, waited since 10 in the morning just for the chance to speak to her for a few seconds. Eala thanked the crowd in Tagalog, telling them she was doing her best to make them proud and asking them to keep following her journey. It was, by every account, a mob scene generated entirely by affection rather than commerce. But here's the question worth sitting with for a second. Why does a country go this hard for an athlete who, 12 months earlier, most casual fans couldn't have picked out of a lineup? The answer isn't Wimbledon. Wimbledon is the headline. The real answer is a 5-month pattern that had been building quietly, tournament by tournament, since January. And once you see the whole shape of it, the mall scene stops looking strange and starts looking inevitable. Rewind to January 2026. Eala headlined the inaugural Philippine Women's Open at Rizal Memorial Tennis Center in Manila, the Philippines' first ever WTA-level tournament on home soil. That same month, at the Australian Open, her first-round match against Alicia Parks, which she lost 0-6, 6-3, 6-2, drew a crowd so far beyond what organizers expected that hundreds of fans were locked out of the intimate Court 6 and forced to watch on a big screen outside. It became such a talking point that Novak Djokovic himself was asked about it days later. His answer: having too big a crowd is a very good problem to have. He added that the Philippines was clearly discovering, in real time, that it had a global tennis star. Then came February. At the Dubai Tennis Championships, Eala faced world number 8 Jasmine Paolini. Yes, the same player who would later beat her at Wimbledon, and won 6-1, 7-6, 5, backed by a loud contingent of Filipino fans in the stands, to reach the round of 16. It was her first win over a top 10 opponent of the season. It would not be her last. By March, at Indian Wells, the pattern had become undeniable. Reporters covering the tournament noted that her practice sessions were drawing crowds comparable to those following Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, and Venus Williams on nearby courts. Remarkable company for a player who, 1 year earlier, was grinding through lower-tier events most casual fans never hear about. And through it all, the peer reactions kept stacking up. When Swiatek fell to Eala at Wimbledon, the reaction rippled well past tennis media. Catherine, Princess of Wales, joined Billie Jean King, Venus Williams, and Maria Sharapova in publicly acknowledging the result. Sharapova's name matters here in a way that's easy to miss if you don't follow Eala closely. She has said Sharapova is her childhood idol, which means the win at Wimbledon wasn't just historic. It was, for Eala personally, the moment her own hero noticed her back. A veteran Filipino sports broadcaster, TJ Manitok, put words to what was actually happening on the ground, describing the country as having been starved for its next Manny Pacquiao. Someone whose matches could stop daily life the way Pacquiao's fights once did. Whether or not you buy the full comparison, the underlying observation was accurate. The Philippines had been circling this kind of moment for years, and Eala's 2026 run gave it somewhere to land. So here's where the story picks up speed, and this is the part that makes the whole thing worth watching closely, because it did not stop at the mall in Makati. On July 27th, Eala flew to Washington, D.C. for the Mubadala City D.C. Open, her first tournament of the North American hardcourt swing, and her competitive return after the emotional whiplash of Wimbledon and the homecoming that followed. Tournament chairman Mark Ein later told reporters that organizers had worked hard in the spring just to bring her to Washington at all, because the demand from fans the moment her participation was confirmed had been immediate and relentless. What happened next sounds almost scripted. In her first match against former world number 4 Qin Wenjing, the reigning Olympic gold medalist, Eala dropped the first set, then clawed back, winning 4-6, 6-4, 6-1, in front of what reporters described as the loudest, most boisterous crowd the tournament had seen all week. Local media started calling it Eala Mania. Next round, the defending DC Open champion, Leylah Fernandez, a fellow left-hander. Eala fell behind 1-5 in the second set, a hole that, in most matches, ends the conversation. She didn't just climb out of it. She won the set in a tiebreak and closed out the match 6-2, 7-6, 1, eliminating the defending champion. Then the quarterfinals. World number 10 Alina Svitolina, the tournament's second seed, a player Eala had already beaten once that season on the grass courts of Berlin. She beat her again in Washington 6-3, 6-4, by the exact same scoreline to reach her first Washington semifinal. Do the math on that stretch for a second because it's worth pausing on. Inside the span of 1 week, ranked outside the top 25 by most counts, Eala took down the reigning Olympic champion, the defending tournament champion, and a former world number 10 back-to-back-to-back. That's not a hot streak. That's a player operating at a completely different level than she was competing at even 6 months earlier. And here's the part that should really make you sit up. As of right now, Alexandra Eala is preparing to face Naomi Osaka, a 4-time Grand Slam champion, in the semifinals of the Mubadala DC Open. Win or lose that match, she has already banked her 6th win over a top 10 opponent this season, her 4th top 10 scalp in a row, and her 3rd semifinal appearance of the year. Think about what that means for a second. This is a player who, this time last year, was known mostly within tennis circles as a promising prospect out of the Philippines with a big two-handed backhand and an even bigger following back home. Now she's a career-high world number 28, a 29th seed at the most famous tennis tournament on earth, someone whose practice sessions draw the same crowds as Alcaraz and Sinner, and someone 4 Grand Slam champions deep into a season where she keeps beating players ranked well above her. And somewhere behind all of that is the image that started this video. A shopping mall in Makati, a registration table, a stopwatch, and a country lining up 3 levels deep just to be in the same room as her for a few seconds. Because here's the thing nobody quite says out loud, even though everyone in that mall understood it instinctively. The Philippines wasn't there because she won Wimbledon. She didn't win Wimbledon. She lost in the 4th round. They were there because for the first time in a long time, they had someone worth lining up for. Someone who beat a defending Grand Slam champion on the sport's biggest stage, and then flew home 2 days later and thanked strangers in Tagalog for staying up late to watch her play. Someone who, 12 days after that mall appearance, went to another country entirely and beat 3 ranked, decorated opponents in a row like it was nothing. The scoreline against Paolini at Wimbledon read 6-4, 4-6, 6-3. That result will fade from memory. What won't fade is what came after it. A homecoming, a mall full of strangers who felt like they knew her, and a hard-court run in Washington that's still being written as you watch this. So if you want to see how the Osaka match goes, and what happens when Eala walks into the US Open at the end of August as one of the form players in the sport right now, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is not close to finished. It just found its 2nd gear.